I've been asked to make some comments and draw some conclusions from an ethical perspective. I'd first like to acknowledge, though, as perhaps an elder in this company, I'd like to acknowledge the wonder of life on this planet. And I'd like to acknowledge those of our own species, chiefly Indigenous peoples, who have been custodians of the community of life from time to time in our communities. And I'd like to acknowledge the grandchildren of the world, including the 6 that I have. So that's, what does one say from an ethical perspective? I without launching into an ethics 101 sort of thing, but this point must be made, that the history of Western ethics has been very anthropomorphic, very human-centered. I think you'd be aware of that. And that is reflecting itself in our law. In 1964, the Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court, Earl Warren, said that law floats on a sea of ethics. And it does. That doesn't mean that law equals ethics. It means there'll always be a tension, but there needs to be an ethical critique of law. And I think the case before us tonight underlines that very well. We need a new, as a culture, we need a new approach to ethics, and we need a new approach to law. When one teaches environmental ethics, one usually describes the fact that there are different perspectives of answering the question, how ought we live with the earth? Because interbeing is scientifically and in every experiential way now known to be an existential fact. We are part of each other. That fact is brought to the ethical conversation. But that fact is problematic, and we have had the problematic before us somewhat tonight, because interbeing doesn't rule out that there are conflicting rights. Indeed, it suggests there will be. Therefore, all the more reason for our law and ethics to rigorously engage with each other to produce, as I think these documents that have been sitting behind the case tonight, from the UN Declaration of Human Rights, the Indigenous Peoples Charter, the rights of Mother Nature, and the Earth Charter, which I'd underline in all this process, because the Earth Charter is, I would call it an eco-justice manifesto. It doesn't only deal with the ecological, environmental thing in isolation. It deals with the broader eco-justice agenda. But when one approaches environmental ethics and this question, how are conflicting rights to be assessed, you can either try to do that from an anthropocentric basis, and in the case before us tonight of the Great Barrier Reef, you might argue that from a human perspective, we must look after the reef because it produces the tourism that sustains our economy. It's nice for us to look at. It is something that will affect us as humans if it is effective. So there's an anthropocentric argument that can be made. Is it an adequate argument in the end? Then there is a second ethical approach to environmental ethics, which is sometimes called extensionism. It extends beyond the human to other animals, sensate beings, the rights of moral interests. So we've learnt tonight, we knew before tonight, that the reef is a living organism. It is full of animals. It is full of sensate beings. It is beings who, like us, have feelings, can suffer, can live and die. So an extensionist argument can be made for the protection of the reef. The third style of ethical argument is about the whole system, the Gaia argument, the ecological holism or ecocentrism, which puts the focus on the biosphere, biodiversity, and on complex ecosystems. And certainly we've had evidence presented tonight that makes it very clear that you can make an strong ethical argument on these ecocentric grounds, indeed perhaps the strongest argument. But my conclusion is, and one can throw into the mix too, and they've been mentioned by one or two others of our panel, the arguments of intergenerational justice, which sort of flow through all these, the precautionary principle that open to different interpretations, isn't it? In fact, the precautionary principle, there can be, I think, blind spots in an ecocentric perspective, and the precautionary principle might warn us about them. And there certainly can be excesses in an anthropocentric argument, and the precautionary principle warns us against them. So, from those points of view, added to everything I've said, it's very difficult to, on the evidence we've heard, to find any ethical argument, even the weakest anthropocentric argument, that would not support the case for the enforcement of existing legislation and the culpability of the Australian and Queensland governments in the present situation of the Reef, and indeed the need to extend our legal obligations and practices for the defence of the Reef. And through it all, may it be that down the years our culture actually begins to change, so that we are a life-centred culture. And of course, then I can wax eloquently, can't I, Michelle, about eco-spirituality. And it was so good to hear Thomas Berry given space in the discussion. Thank you.